The storm had rolled in without warning, turning the dirt roads of Waverly into thick veins of mud. Most folks stayed in, shutters closed, lights dimmed. But Officer James Rourke was still on duty, rain pattering across his cruiser as he pulled up to an aging farmhouse on the outskirts of town. His K-9 partner, Diesel, shifted uneasily in the back seat, ears pinned forward at something James couldn't yet see. The call had been vague, strange noises, nothing more, but it was the way Diesel stiffened once they stepped inside that chilled James to the bone. The dog's eyes locked on a basement door that hadn't been opened in years. If you're the kind of person who likes dark, atmospheric stories like this one, you might want to stay connected. You'll know when the next story arrives. The farmhouse smelled of damp wood and mothballs, old wallpaper peeled in curling strips, exposing plaster that had turned the color of tobacco. The caller, Mrs. Whalen, was a frail woman in her 70s. She stood in the kitchen doorway, wringing her hands. "I didn't know who else to call," she said. Her voice quivered like the walls in the wind. "It started last week, scratching, dragging sounds. Thought maybe raccoons. But last night, I swear I heard a voice." James lowered his flashlight beam, scanning the warped floorboards. Voices. She nodded, pale as parchment. From down there. Her eyes darted toward the hallway. Diesel's nails clicked against the linoleum as he pulled at the leash. His growl was low, steady. James followed the direction of his gaze. The basement door was at the end of the hall, painted shut with layers of cracked white paint. A padlock rusted over its latch. "Has this door been locked long?" James asked. Mrs. Whalen pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "Since my husband died. That was 15 years ago." Diesel let out a sharp bark, the kind that echoed in James's gut. He knelt to calm the dog, but Diesel's eyes stayed fixed, unblinking at the door. James straightened. "I'll need to check." Mrs. Whalen hesitated, but something in his tone, or perhaps in Diesel's insistence, made her fetch a tin of old keys from the drawer. They rattled in her hand as she passed them over. The first few keys didn't fit. The lock was stubborn, crusted with rust. When the right one finally slid in, James had to lean his shoulder into it, twisting until the padlock snapped open with a metallic crack that sounded too loud in the narrow hall. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. James looked back at Mrs. Whalen. "Stay here." He unclipped Diesel's lead. The dog's body stiffened, ready. With his flashlight in one hand and his other brushing the grip of his sidearm, James pulled the basement door open. Hinges shrieked. A breath of air rose up, stale, sour, tinged with something metallic. The steps descended into darkness. Diesel went first, muscles taut, nose twitching as he crept downward. James followed slowly, the beam of light cutting through webs that hung like gauze. The house seemed to inhale around him, groaning as the storm pressed against its frame. Halfway down, James froze. There was sound beneath the storm, a faint rhythm, like chains dragged against concrete. His heart knocked once hard. "Hello." His voice cracked the dark, swallowed immediately by the damp air. Something shifted below. Diesel growled, teeth bared, the fur along his spine bristling. James swept the beam left, then right. The basement was bigger than he expected. Low ceiling, cement floor, shelves lined with jars clouded by age. At the far wall, covered in dust and mildew, sat an old freezer chest. It rattled, not from the storm. From within, James's pulse slammed against his throat. He stepped closer, slow, boots scraping the floor. The rattling grew frantic, as if whatever was inside sensed his presence. He crouched, running the light across its surface. Scratches covered the lid. Long, desperate scratches. Diesel barked, the sound violent, urgent. James reached for the latch. His hand trembled despite his training, despite the calm he built over years of small-town calls that never escalated beyond drunken fights and petty theft. This was different. This was wrong. He lifted the latch. The lid creaked open. Cold vapor spilled out, carrying the smell of rot copper and something human. Inside was not what James expected. Curled in the frozen dark was a girl. Pale, lips blue, eyes half-lidded but alive. Her wrists were bound with rope, her breath shallow. She tried to speak, but her voice was a rasp, broken and weak. James staggered back, heart stuttering. Diesel pressed forward, whining now, his nose nudging the edge of the freezer. The girl's cracked lips parted. "Help me!" James's training surged to surface. He fumbled for his radio, voice clipped and urgent. "This is Officer Rourke. I need immediate medical response at 1189, County Road 6. Possible abduction victim. Alive. Repeat, alive. Request backup." Static crackled. Then the dispatcher's voice came thin through the storm. "Copy that, Rourke. Units en route." James dropped to his knees beside the freezer, flashlight trembling in his hand. The girl's skin was clammy, her breath shallow but steady enough to spark a thread of hope. Her wrists were bound so tight the rope had cut raw furrows into her skin. He pulled his knife and sliced through them, wincing as she whimpered. "Easy, kid," he murmured. "You're safe now. I've got you." Her eyes flicked open, hollow, terrified, and impossibly young. 14? Maybe 15. The kind of age that should have been sleepovers and homework, not chains and darkness. Diesel whined, circling, ears still straining toward the shadows. Something wasn't right. James eased the girl out of the freezer. Her body was featherlight, her legs limp. As he lifted her, his beam caught something scrawled on the cement wall behind the freezer. Numbers. A sequence of them, scratched deep into the wall, gouged with some sharp object. 0321, 0321, repeating, over and over again. He swallowed hard. A code? A date? "Officer." The girl's whisper rasped against his neck. "Don't trust." Her words broke off in a cough. Blood flecked her lips. "Don't trust who?" James pressed, but her eyes had rolled back. He carried her upstairs, Diesel at his heel. Mrs. Whalen gasped when she saw the girl. She staggered back against the counter. A hand clapped over her mouth. "Oh, dear Lord, is she—" "She's alive." James cut in. "Ambulance is on the way. Do you know anything about this?" The old woman shook her head. Horror etched across her face. "No, I never. My husband, he locked that door. Said it wasn't safe down there after the flood. I never questioned it." James's jaw tightened. The husband had died 15 years ago. The girl couldn't have been here that long, which meant someone else had been using that basement. Someone with a key. He laid the girl gently on the couch, covering her with a blanket from a chair. Diesel paced the room, restless, growling whenever thunder cracked. Sirens wailed faintly through the storm. Relief flickered in James's chest, but it was short-lived, because as the girl stirred again, she whispered a name James knew too well. "Callahan." The sheriff arrives. Sheriff Tom Callahan pulled up in his black SUV, lights cutting through the downpour. He was a broad man in his 50s, hair going silver at the temples, his badge worn smooth from decades of service. James had respected him since his academy days, when Callahan told rookies that the badge was a promise, not a privilege. But as Callahan stepped inside the farmhouse, shaking rain from his coat, James felt a ripple of unease. He watched the sheriff's eyes land on the girl. For the briefest second, there was a flicker, too quick to pin down, but it wasn't shock. It was recognition. "Jesus," Callahan muttered, crouching by the couch. "Who found her?" "Diesel." James said flatly. "He led me to the basement freezer. She was bound, half frozen." She spoke before she blacked out. "What did she say?" Callahan's voice was calm, measured, but his eyes didn't leave the girl. James hesitated. The dispatcher's words echoed in his ear from earlier. "Units en route. Not I'll send them. Not hold tight. Just a confirmation. Too clean." She was incoherent. James lied. Mostly gibberish. Callahan studied him for a beat longer than comfortable. Then he clapped James's shoulder. "You did good. We'll let the doctors take it from here." The paramedics bundled the girl onto a stretcher, hustling her out into the rain. Callahan followed, speaking low into his radio. James caught none of it. Diesel pressed against his leg, vibrating with unease. An uneasy night. James should have gone home after paperwork, but sleep felt impossible. He found himself driving the rain-slicked streets long after midnight, Diesel's head resting against the passenger seat. The girl's whisper wouldn't leave him. Don't trust Callahan. At the station, James pulled the missing persons files. The girl hadn't spoken her name, but he had a face now. He sifted through reports, faded photographs, desperate pleas from families. And there she was, Hannah Price, missing since February. Last seen outside the middle school, waiting for her mom to pick her up. James's stomach sank. The case had been filed under likely runaway. Sheriff Callahan himself had signed off on the closure. He closed the folder and sat back, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. His gut churned with something sharp, anger, betrayal, dread. Diesel's ears pricked. The dog let out a low growl, staring at the door of James's office. A shadow passed under it. Footsteps receded down the hall. James pushed up, flung the door open. Empty. A folded piece of paper lay on the floor. He bent, picked it up. The handwriting was jagged. Hurried. Stop digging. For your sake. No signature. James crumpled it in his fist. His first instinct was to confront Callahan. But if the sheriff really was involved, going head-to-head too soon would be suicide. He needed proof. The farmhouse revisited. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the field steaming under a pale gray sky. James returned to the Whalen farmhouse, Diesel leaping from the cruiser before he could leash him. Mrs. Whalen answered the door, her eyes bloodshot. "They came back," she whispered before James could speak. "After you left. Man, they searched the house. I told them to go, but they said they were with the sheriff's office." James's blood iced. What did they take? Her voice broke. The freezer. He pushed past her, charging into the basement. The space was gutted, shelves empty, floor scraped. The freezer was gone, along with the scratch numbers on the wall. Fresh paint covered cement, still tacky under his fingertips. They were scrubbing the crime clean. Diesel barked at a corner of the basement. James knelt, running his hand along the floor. His fingers brushed a sliver of paper jammed in a crack between the cement slabs. He eased it out carefully. It was torn, damp, almost illegible. But a single line stood out. Shipment 0321 Mill Creek Barn. The numbers on the wall. James folded the scrap and slipped it into his pocket, pulse hammering. He climbed the stairs, meeting Mrs. Whalen's frightened eyes. "Lock your doors. Don't answer anyone but me." Her lips trembled. "Officer, what's happening?" He didn't answer. Couldn't, because the truth was forming in the pit of his gut, darker and heavier than anything he wanted to admit. This wasn't just one girl. This was bigger. Much bigger. Mill Creek. Night fell again, sharp and cold. James parked a mile out from Mill Creek, a place kids once used for parties until the sheriff cracked down. Now it sat abandoned, barn sagging, fields choked with weeds. He left his cruiser and moved it on foot, Diesel padding silently at his side. The barn loomed against the moonlight, boards blackened with rot, but faint lights seeped through the cracks, flickering like lanterns. James crouched behind a rusted tractor, peering through the gaps. Inside, men moved crates stacked chest-high. Their voices were low, urgent. He counted at least 5, maybe more. And on the far side of the barn was another freezer, industrial size, chained shut. Diesel growled softly. James's gut twisted. The scrap of paper in his pocket suddenly felt like a live wire. He needed backup. But if Callahan was compromised, there was no one he could trust. No one but Diesel. As he shifted to get a better view, a voice cut the night. "Enjoying the show, Rourke?" James froze. The barrel of a shotgun pressed against his temple. And when he turned, he saw the one man he'd hoped he was wrong about, Sheriff Callahan. The cold steel of the shotgun barrel dug into James's temple. Sheriff Callahan's voice was low, steady, almost conversational. "You should have left it alone." James's throat tightened. Diesel growled, teeth bared, ready to spring. But one twitch of Callahan's finger could end everything. "Hands up," Callahan ordered. Slow. James obeyed, raising his palms. His heart thudded, but his mind worked faster, measuring distance angles, the timing of Diesel's lunge. Callahan gestured toward the barn with the gun. Walk. Inside, the men glanced up, startled. One of them, a gaunt man with pockmarked skin, spat on the ground, told you he'd sniff around. Callahan shoved James forward. Rourke here doesn't know when to quit. The barn reeked of mildew, motor oil, and something sourer, fear, sweat, maybe worse. The crates stacked along the walls weren't feed or tools. They bore shipping labels, stamped with dates and codes. James's eyes locked on one, 0321. The freezer in the corner rattled faintly. Chains clinking. James's stomach turned. Callahan noticed his stare. Don't romanticize it, son. It's logistics, supply and demand. This town doesn't have much, but it's a perfect place to move product. Nobody pays attention out here. Product. James forced the word out, though he knew the answer. The sheriff's jaw tightened. Runaways. Kids nobody misses. They come cheap and they sell high. Simple math. The words hit like a hammer. James had suspected corruption, maybe trafficking, but hearing it laid out so plainly by the man he'd trusted, it gutted him. You've been closing the cases, James whispered. Hannah Price, and God knows how many others. You buried them in paperwork. Callahan's gaze flickered, not with guilt but with weariness. You think I like this? This town is dying. Farms gone. Factories gone. Folks barely making it. Somebody was always going to move in, turn Waverly into a pipeline. I made sure it was controlled, contained. By you, better me than outsiders who don't care if a dozen bodies turn up on our doorstep. James felt sick. Callahan wasn't just corrupt. He believed he was saving the town by sacrificing his children. One of the men laughed. Enough speeches. Let's gut him and toss the dog. Diesel barked, lunging, but James snapped his fingers sharply. The K-9 froze, muscles trembling. Callahan smirked. That's loyalty. Shame you never learned when to direct it. The sheriff motioned toward the crates. Tie him. Two men advanced with rope. James's pulse hammered. His gun was gone, his radio useless. But he had one advantage. Diesel's readiness, his own training, and the fact that Callahan underestimated just how desperate he was. When the first man grabbed his arm, James drove his knee upward, snapping the man's nose with a crunch. Diesel launched at the second, teeth sinking into his forearm, tearing a scream from his throat. The barn exploded in chaos. James spun, wrenching the shotgun from Callahan's grip. They struggled, boots sliding on the dirt floor, the weapon clattering loose. A crate toppled, spilling its contents, handcuffs, duct tape, syringes. The truth lay bare, ugly and undeniable. Another man swung a crowbar. James ducked, drove his elbow into the man's gut, and grabbed the shotgun again. He racked it, breath ragged. Back, he roared. For a moment, everyone froze, even Callahan. Then the freezer rattled again, harder this time. A muffled cry bled through the chains. James's hand shook, but his aim held steady. Open it. Callahan's jaw flexed. You don't want to see what's in there. Open it. The sheriff's eyes burned with something almost like pity. Rourke, the world's uglier than you think. You can't save them all. Maybe not. James's voice broke, raw. But I can save her. Callahan didn't move. James fired into the ceiling, with splintering dust raining down. Now! The sheriff flinched, then nodded at the gaunt man, who fumbled with the lock. Chains clattered to the ground. James yanked the lid open. Inside were two more girls, bound and gagged, their eyes wide with terror. Younger than Hannah, barely teenagers. James's chest cracked open. Diesel whined, nudging the edge of the freezer as if urging him forward. Get them out, James barked. The men hesitated. Callahan's face twisted with something bitter, almost grief. Then headlights cut across the barn walls. Engines roared outside. James spun, shotgun raised. Backup had arrived, half a dozen patrol cars. Relief washed through him until he saw the faces of the deputies climbing out. Not allies, accomplices. They fanned out, weapons drawn. James's breath hitched. He was outnumbered, cornered. Callahan's men grinned, emboldened. The sheriff stepped closer, voice soft enough only James could hear. "You see now? The whole town's in on it. Judges, deputies, shopkeepers who keep quiet. It's bigger than you. You pull that trigger, you'll be dead before you hit the ground. And those girls will vanish again." James's vision tunneled. Betrayal pressed in from every side. His badge, his oath, his trust in the system, all ashes. But then he looked at Diesel. The dog stood braced, teeth bared, eyes locked on the enemy. Loyal, unyielding. James lowered the shotgun slightly, breathing hard. Then he made a choice. He fired. Not at Callahan, not at the deputies, but at the gas lantern perched on a crate. The blast shattered glass. Flame licked the spilled fuel. The barn erupted into fire. Chaos swallowed everything. Men shouting, girls screaming, smoke boiling upward. James grabbed the two girls from the freezer, dragging them toward the back as Diesel snapped at anyone who tried to block them. Heat seared his skin, but adrenaline drove him. Callahan roared behind him. "Rourke, you'll burn us all." Maybe that was the point. James kicked open a rotten side door, bursting into the cold night air with the girls in his arms. Diesel bolted ahead, leading the way to the tree line. Gunfire cracked behind them. James ducked, shielding the girls. Splinters tore from the barn walls, but the fire spread faster than bullets. Screams turned ragged as smoke poured skyward. James ran until his legs gave out, collapsing in the wet grass. The girls clung to him, sobbing. Diesel pressed against his chest, panting, his first singe but his eyes alert. Behind them, the barn was a torch, the sky painted orange. Aftermath. By dawn, the fire had reduced Mill Creek Barn to a blackened skeleton. Firefighters claimed it was an accident, an old structure, lightning, faulty wiring. Official reports buried the truth under ash and bureaucracy. Callahan was gone. No body recovered. No arrest made. Just gone like smoke. The deputies who survived swore ignorance, insisting they'd come to help but arrived too late. No charges stuck. No justice came down. But the girls lived. Hannah Price and the others were placed in protective care, their families shielded from the deeper rot that clung to Waverly. James turned in his badge 2 weeks later. He could wear it knowing what it had been complicit in. The town looked at him with suspicion, some with quiet gratitude, most with fear. They didn't want to know the truth. They wanted their peace back, even if it was built on bones. He moved to a cabin outside town, just him and Diesel. At night, he sometimes woke to the sound of phantom chains, phantom voices. Diesel would press close, grounding him, reminding him that even if the system had failed, even if justice slipped away, at least some lives had been saved. On the porch one evening, the sun bleeding out over the fields, James scratched behind Diesel's ears. "You knew, didn't you? That night at the farmhouse. You saw what I couldn't." Diesel licked his hand, eyes steady, loyal as ever. James stared at the horizon, the weight of secrets pressing but not crushing. Callahan might still be out there. The town might never face its reckoning. But those girls were free. And sometimes saving a few was enough to break the chain. The silence settled deep, heavy but not empty. For the first time in weeks, James let it stay.